Hello everyone, this is Lala, and today I'm going to be making uh, a two-part video, but I'm covering the aggressive alpha personality archetype, and this one is very long, and since this one isn't gender specific, it fits the men and the women. But for today, I'm specifically going to focus on the aggressive slash alpha male archetype. And these are the men who come in, they have these very, very big personalities. They tend to get into a lot of conflict during their seasons. They are natural leaders, and because they are natural leaders, they tend to be the head of their alliances no matter what they try to do. They always want people to kind of follow them and to do what they want, and they're very vocal with what they want strategically, and people see this as intimidating, and they're usually the ones who tend to be a lot of the major characters, the major leaders, and they can either flame out very quickly or they last a while and then eventually flame out. But usually they don't have the personalities or the strategies that are conducive to winning, though some of them make it very far and are notable players and personalities within the BB pantheon. So I actually forgot about a person, and that is Tristan from Baby 2. And I think the reason why I forgot about him is because there's literally no commentary about his gameplay whatsoever, and he was expelled before the first eviction, mainly due to his aggressive behavior. We saw him get close to getting very violent with Kent, and apparently that was since the first time. He threatened to punch Autumn, and then obviously there's the knife incident that he was claiming to. He wanted to hold it against Krista's neck. I think he might have actually tried to, or he did it if I don't remember correctly. But either way, yeah, he clearly had a lot of issues, and he should not have passed the mental test, but he did. And yeah, arguably one of the most aggressive people ever on the show. And this was in the first real iteration of the show. So we of course have to go back to Big Brother 2, and the first of this archetype really is Hardy. So he was supposed to be the heartthrob and stud of the cast, and in ways he still was, but he's supposed to be kind of like the all American Superman figure, but because this game was so unprecedented, people didn't really know what they were getting into. And while I do think that's a part of Hardy's personality, his more aggressive, volatile, controlling, strategic, and honestly just messy side came out pretty quickly, especially with him winning back to back to back HOHs and him kind of becoming like a martyr like figure in the house, where he was also playing this morality game, where he was making all these cutthroat moves, but he wanted to criticize others who were villainous and who weren't deemed the most liked. He was seen as one of the leaders of Top, but he, and of course with the help of Nicole, who will be on the female version of this list, had several people ruthlessly throughout the season got into his fair share of drama and just proves to be a very big hypocrite. They even made a big deal of him dyeing his hair from brown to black so he could look darker. He started smoking during the season. He started getting bags under his eyes, and he just started becoming the thing that he hated in the house. And he, of course, got his karma in the final four. So he really started this blueprint, and it's going to be interesting to see how it evolved or devolved from him onto the current day. Now we are moving on to Roddy, and it's very interesting because it's clear from our point of view that he was cast to be Big Brother 3's version of Hardy, and it's also something that the cast in the Big Brother 3 house knew at the time too, where they consistently mentioned the comparison. Roddy didn't watch Big Brother 2, so he didn't know who Hardy was, but he saw pictures and the comparisons were made, and they did have similar roles, where essentially Roddy was kind of the figurehead of that initial six-person alliance that was kind of running things for the first few weeks of the seasons. He was also very charismatic, though Roddy was a lot more meticulous with his words, and he paid more attention to how America saw things and the other house saw things, so he was a lot more calculated in how he portrayed himself. Though you could definitely see the more manipulative, cunning, and honestly entitled side of him when things didn't go his way. He never really took accountability for anything that happened in the house. And though he claimed that he wouldn't manipulate, he wouldn't backstab, and he wouldn't do all that stuff, but as soon as someone else did something to him, he had a big issue with it. So honestly, he was just very hypocritical throughout the season. He wasn't going to argue your butt off like Hardy would, and he didn't have as much of a tantrum as Hardy would, but if anything, it made him a lot more calculated. And of course, he was called the devil, which he didn't like, and there's a whole backlash in that regard, too. On to Big Brother 4. Scott is the first example of the alpha man who crashed out. So he was a part of the 8th Alliance solely due to being an original, but his fighting with Amanda got people very, very annoyed, and it was clear that he wasn't the most stable person overall. And there was talk about his alliance essentially putting him up post video, but that didn't happen. There's a lot of talk about people wanting to send him home. And then he really just went downhill. He started throwing objects around. There's some other alleged behind the scenes stuff that was kind of nasty, and it led to him being expelled before the first eviction. But even if he stayed, I doubt he would have stayed long either way. So we are moving on to Big Brother 5, and this was kind of a two-parter, and I wasn't going to put this first person on, but I do feel like he kind of fits a lot of the tropes. So I am placing Scott here, where obviously I don't think he's much of an alpha personality, but he's very aggressive with the way that he picked argument with people in the house pointlessly, the way that he thought he knew it all, the way he excessively lied. And then when he did try to get involved strategically, he kind of just bulldozed over people. A lot of people associated him with Jace, but I think the thing with Scott is that he's just a lot less charismatic than Jace, so people kind of just focus on Jace compared to Scott. And I think that's something that Scott knew and was kind of bothered by, but when it came to the toxicity of the house and the men, it was Jace and Scott, though Scott is definitely seen as the lesser person within that dynamic. Next person in this list is Jace, and that obviously makes sense because one, he and Scott were in the same alliance, two, they're booted back to back, and three, and they kind of fill the same purpose on the show, where they're both these very obnoxious, younger, fit men with these big personalities, but Jace's personality was just a lot bigger than Scott, and he was definitely smarter than Scott, but I think he was even worse socially. Jace was always the main guy that they wanted to target. Jace was the one who caused the most drama in the house. Jace was the one who was always putting on these performances in front of everyone. And you could tell that he really knew what his role was. He knew he was going to be the bad guy, and he really, really, really played it up. Unlike some of the earlier guys, especially from BB2 and BB3 on this list, where they are so worried about America's perception and wanting to be perceived as good, he knew he was the bad guy and he loved it. But he, of course, has arguably, if not the most iconic and well-known early aggressive male flameouts, where obviously he had power during the first few weeks because his allies and himself won power. They were very obnoxious about it. The house did not like him at all. And then he had the huge fall where he was the first victim of the back door, and just the way they went about it was just so cinematic. Despite being such an early boot, he was seen as the star of the season, which is why he was brought back 2 seasons later, and he flamed out even quicker. But he was actually trying to redeem himself on All Stars, where he was trying to play both sides, but he was a lot calmer in comparison. He didn't want to be the BB5 Jace guy anymore, but once he was turned on because they didn't want to target Chilltown, he blew his top, and you saw the Big Brother 5 days come out where he picked a fight with James, he picked a fight with Marcellus, he had that Vita speech, and he was throwing stuff around. And yeah, it was definitely an ugly but memorable way to go out. And Jace is definitely arguably the most iconic male on this list, and especially from the first era. So I was going back and forth about whether I wanted to put this person on the list or not because they are alpha and aggressive in one way, but not in the other way. And I'm going to talk about the other way first, where Howie isn't a strategic person. He's not someone who's going to lead in alliance. He's not someone who's going to be the figurehead of an alliance. He'll be the horn that someone uses to talk and vocalize their thoughts, but he's not the one running the alliance. And we saw this on both season 6 and season 7, and when he had the chance to make a move when he was HOH on season 6, he made the wrong move and essentially sabotaged his entire side. But Howie is mainly on this list due to his personality. He is very loud, he is very attention seeking, he wants to be the star of the show, and he essentially became infamous because of the way he went after the friendship, specifically April, during that week where Kaser was backstabbed. And because he came out of that season being so liked for his behavior, he tried to replicate it as well on Big Brother All Stars. But it didn't work out that same way because people didn't want to see him yelling at and picking at Chicken George, calling a bunch of the women ugly, being vile and rambunctious. People didn't want to see that time around with Big Brother 7, and the novelty kind of just wore off. So on a gameplay level, he doesn't fit here, but on a personality level, absolutely. Now we are moving on to the post-classic era, and obviously Big Brother 8 is the first season under this new era, and the obvious choice is Evil Dick. Just from the fact that they created new music to play for him whenever he was in an antagonistic or confrontational viewpoint, it's clear that he fits the aggressive alpha male archetype to the T. Evil Dick picked the most fights with people throughout the season. He claimed a lot of it was strategic, but I really just don't believe him. And I do think a lot of it was personal, and he kind of carried on with this in real life. He was very involved in the strategy of the season, so I will give him that. And he definitely does have leader energy. But it was just the way that he dealt with people just rubbed people the wrong way. And obviously, there's a lot of influence from the America's Player twist. He did bring up a lot of icky and nasty elements about people. He made fun of people's religions. He made fun of people's sexuality. He kind of wished SA on some people. It was just way, way, way too far. And he was definitely a bully. But obviously, he ended up winning, though all of it definitely had to do with the funkiness of the America's Player twist. Even during the short time that he was on Big Brother 13, he was setting up the vets to have success by creating some of those important bonds with people like in Adam and a Porsche that would work with the vets eventually, and that would give them the numbers. But obviously, he was pulled before he really could do anything confrontationally wise, or even have him execute his strategy to the fullest. But yeah, he definitely fits this archetype, and he's probably one of the most known or the infamous ones from this archetype. So the person that I'm putting here from BB9 is most definitely Matt. Even if you ignore the real life stuff that happened with him, which is just abhorrent and horrendous, when you look at the cast and the events of the season, he's probably the most alpha like in the cast, or at least out of the men. He was more than fine with backstabbing people, playing both sides, and he really I don't know if playing it up for the cameras is it, because I feel like that's just who he was, and he is kind of just a slime ball overall. But he was very open about it in the dining room. He wanted to have all of his hands in each pot. He wanted to manipulate things, but he was very sloppy with it. He always found himself in some sort of drama with some of the men and some of the women in the house. He was always such a huge target, and he was the perfect shield for someone like an Adam and Orion. And I do think that out of the men, he had the most aggressive personality out of all of them, and he didn't give follower vibes like Orion did. But he wasn't as aloof as someone like an Adam was either. He was always kind of just like a wolf who came at you and was something that you knew about. Now we are moving on to Jesse, who not only did the next two seasons, which are Big Brother 10 and Big Brother 11, but he's probably the best person, like as an actual person, like morally, on this list. So when it comes to Big Brother 10, you definitely could tell that he was very cocky and arrogant, partially due to him being the youngest in the house, but also being the most athletic, and He claimed that he did what he did because he always wanted to defend the underdogs and the people who were being picked on. So, in his point of view, that's what he was doing. He got into an argument with Rennie literally night one because Rennie was disrupting his sleep, though it was because he chose to go to sleep very early while everyone else was celebrating the first day. That got him on the blog and he had to save himself with the POV. But luckily, the house shifted in a way that benefited him. He was HOH the second week, so people started kissing his butt. But then, as soon as he didn't get his way, which was his last 2 weeks in the house, he started yelling at people. He was getting very aggressive with Keisha when it came to his pitching and how he targeted Libra. And of course, there's the infamous birthday fight that he definitely started, and it caused for him to be blindsided. On Break Brother 11, he came back and he was in a better position because he was a veteran and he was a sole veteran, so a lot of people kind of just got at him when it came to that. He wasn't as confrontational as he was in the prior season, but when it came to his personality, it didn't really change much. But of course, the other side started villainizing him. He had a loyal group of allies who were all kind of argumentative in their own ways. And then with the way he backdoored Casey, that rubbed people the wrong way. And then he got coup d'etat. I think the thing with Jesse is that he's a wrestler, or at least he was an aspiring wrestler at this point. So a part of him knows that he has to kind of play things up and be vocal and be very entertaining. So I guess in a way he's like Jace in that sense. But you could tell a lot of it was just his personality as well. But as a person, he's probably the best out of everyone who's on this list. So we have a few more from BB11 to talk about, and chronologically, we are going to start with Russell. And I feel like for someone who only did one season overall, he is arguably one of the most prototypical aggressive alpha men to have ever been on the show. I know at the end he claimed that he was just playing a character, but I don't really think that was the case. I do think that he knew that he was on a TV show and he wanted to enjoy being on a TV show. But like Evil Dick, a lot of his tantrums, fights, arguments, and aggression just came a bit too out of nowhere for it to all be strategy. And you could definitely tell that he was annoyed with people like Chima. He kind of started picking on Jeff at the beginning. Some of it was for gameplay, but other parts was just to because he was really, really, really annoyed with Jeff. They had him back and forth at various points throughout the season, and I do think he tried to use intimidation as a tactic to kind of get his way throughout the season, especially with who he was aligned with. But the thing is, he started turning people off, especially when he had that rant where he was just randomly yelling at Lydia in the second week, and his allies essentially chose Ronnie over him, which started because he started antagonizing Ronnie for way too long, and Russell was just very transparent and selfish with a lot of his moves, so they started turning on him. And luckily for him, the Q saved him, but clearly Jeff didn't really see Russell as a valuable ally since he turned on him a few weeks later because Russell made a final two within the people who were in the final four, or in their final four, which is what should be done. Obviously, Russell lost his lid, and yeah, someone who was very entertaining, and just from how he kind of switched in his eviction, he might be a better person in real life, but on the show, he's definitely a prototypical villain, and he was edited that way, and he knew he was going to be the villain, and he ate it up. So, the next person on this list is most definitely Jeff. And what's interesting about him is that his experience on the show, and especially the edits, mainly paint him as a good guy who is the most agreeable man ever. But once you look past the edit and look solely at the actions, Jeff is most definitely an aggressive alpha male on both Big Brother 11 and Big Brother 13. On Big Brother 11, even with his fight with Russell in the first week, he gave just as good as he got, but they did edit out his more harsh arguing points back, which were definitely homophobic, and he really didn't attempt to get close to his aligned or to get close to the people that he wasn't aligned with. So that's why he was put on the out. But due to all of that and the dynamics of that other alliance and how they're portrayed, he was given the coup d'etat because he was seen as the wrong, righteous, angelic one. He used the power that he was given rightfully So, Jeff still got into his fair share of arguments throughout the season where he definitely came off as aggressive. Even some of the conversations with he and Jordan, especially later on in the season, didn't come off in the best light on his end. And then even with the way he handled the Russell situation, he was definitely the one and the wrong. But of course they edited Russell to be the wrong one and they made it look like Jeff was righteous and Jeff got his swift karma on Big Brother on the round after with Kevin backstabbing him. On Big Brother 13, it seemed like the producers were trying to set it up for Jeff to win, especially with Brendan coming off as worse in comparison and Evil Dick being sent home. And a lot of the newbies on that season specifically liked Jeff and Jordan more than any of the other veterans. He had his group of people, but then he got into his fair share of arguments as well. He still had his homophobic moments. He was awful to some of the newbies, especially during week 3, with how he acted regarding how dare you guys try to backdoor me. I'm entitled to spend the entire summer with Jordan in the Big Brother house, despite us not living together. Blah 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 blah. He has a very entitled mindset. Anyone who didn't do what he wanted or were aligned with him were coasters and floaters who didn't do crap. He even turned Shelly off with his antics later on in the season. And of course, we had the clown shoot eviction where he came off horribly while he was being evicted, cursing everyone out and they had to bleep out a lot of what he was stating. And of course, they made it look like he was the righteous one in all those situations. So while he may be in one or two more archetypes, he, when it comes to his actions, definitely fits this one. Alrighty, so I was debating about putting Brendan on the list, and I literally went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth about it until the literal very last second. But I did decide to add him, and it's not really because of his gameplay. If you look at his position on both the Big Brother 12 and the Big Brother 13 casts, especially amongst the men, he definitely fits the aggressive alpha male archetype. It was Brendan who was the male who was getting into all of the fights during Big Brother 12 amongst everyone in the house, where all the other men were essentially relatively calm and demure in comparison. And if you look at the dynamics within the veterans, you could definitely tell that Brendan was meant to be the bad guy in comparison to Jeff, just from the newbies that were cast to how they viewed him and Rachel compared to Jeff and Jordan, and just his actions in the house. He came off as a lot more entitled, a lot more angry, a lot more of a know-it-all as well. Heck, even within his dynamic with Rachel during the 2 seasons, he definitely came off as the aggressive alpha man a lot of the times, and it was very uncomfortable to watch at various points throughout the season. But yeah, he was definitely villainized throughout his 2 seasons on the show, though a lot of it was definitely his own doing. When it came to the game, he never really cared too much about it. With Big Brother 12, he did want to get as far as he could, but Big Brother 13, he really just didn't care whatsoever. We literally saw him veto Rachel when he won the veto and he could have saved himself and he went home. He didn't really want to come back the second time anyways, and he ranted on and on about that. But the entitlement was just very, very huge with him, and he did himself absolutely no favor. So while he doesn't fit here with the strategy, when it came to the personality and his dynamics with the other house guests, throughout his 2 seasons, he definitely fits. Out of the rookie men, Keith's obviously the only one that really fits this category, and that's definitely by design. As you will see in many mixed seasons, they want most of their casts, especially the newbies, to be very meek and weak so they can be instantly influenced by the veterans so they can keep the veterans around. And the few that are aggressive and alpha men in this case, men, but it could be for women. But the alpha men, they are usually set up in a way where they're going to be taken out very early by the vets. And that's essentially what happened with Keith. And he did himself absolutely no favors. He was very loud. He was very pushy with his requests. He didn't really consider anyone else's opinions or feelings. He alienated key people like Kalia and Shelly. He couldn't even fake it with the vets long enough where that would have been smart for him to do, so he wouldn't have been nominated the first week. And then he threw the veto because he thought that he would have the vote, and he didn't have the votes. And yeah, he fulfilled prophecy that was meant for him, clearly. Now on to Big Brother 14. I don't have a whole lot to say about this person because it's clear just from their name what casting wanted from them with Willie Hunt. This was during the era that they were really pushing the Hunt family on Survivor as well as Big Brother, and they had three Hunts that they were pushing, and they all filled out that aggressive alpha male personality. Willie essentially got the first HOH. He was very bossy, he was very demanding, he was very hypocritical, he was very aggressive, and as soon as he didn't get his way with the first vote, especially with how he mishandled Frank, and everyone turned on him, he threw a fit, he got aggressive, he the kid butted Joe, and then he was expelled. So, yeah, and he did that because he didn't want to get voted out of the house. Moving on. So, from the same season as Frank, and I definitely feel like, especially on BB14, they definitely gave him the Jeff treatment, where they definitely tried to under edit a lot of his actual actions and painted him as some unjustly wrong, wholly matrimonially like underdog who was screwed over by so many people, and he had absolutely no responsibility as to why he was in the position that he was in, and they really tried to make him the all-American man. Yes, it did suck that whenever he was in HOH, he was on the block, but at the same time, he wasn't doing good socially. He grossed people out, he pissed people off, he said the most vile things about people. He never took accountability for any of his own wrongdoings. He was very entitled and very arrogant as well. Obviously, against Willie, he came off looking great, but after that, he continued the same actions over and over and over again. He kept on picking fights with people. He secluded himself with Boogie while not adapting to the climate and the dynamics of the rest of the house guests. And then he returned on Big Brother 18, where it seemed like he learned from his past mistakes and he was doing better. He was trying to be more social, he was trying to not rely on competitions. But a leopard doesn't really change their spots, so a lot of the same patterns started coming up with a lot of the girls. He were a lot of the bad trash talk. He even groped a few women, which really rubbed people the wrong way. And it was really when that happened, though they only showed him doing it to Devon, where they had to show a lot of this more unsavory behavior that was always there, but he didn't have the America's favorite player thing behind him in 14 like he did in 18 like he did in 14. And then the entire house didn't like him once again, partially due to his messy gameplay. And then he was the last feature, and his legacy really took a fall. But they didn't protect him the second season, so I felt like that was by force and not by choice, if that really makes sense. And the final person from this era is Jeremy, and he's pretty much the prototypical early boot flame out where he thinks he's on the high because he has an alliance, which in this case was the moving company with McCray being HOH, but he started getting closer to a lot of the other people who really weren't popular in the house, and then a few of his allies like Spencer and McCray turned on the alliance, and it was mainly due to him just rubbing them the wrong way. He lost power, especially with Nick going home the second week, and then the entire house essentially agreeing to attempt was I think he was actually backdoored. Yeah. And then the entire house pretty much agreed to backdoor him unceremoniously the third week. So pretty much he fits the archetype to the T, but he's a lot less charismatic than a lot of the other early boot flame out, and he's just more icky than anything else. So there's really not a whole lot to say about him. On to the modern era with Big Brother 16, and the only person that I really have here is Devin. And for the obvious reasons, he was one of the founders of the Bomb Squad Alliance. He wanted it to be mainly men in the alliance. He was very vocal about what he wanted and what he didn't want throughout the game. He then decided to randomly bring in Christine and Amber without asking or consulting his alliance first about it. And then he was trashing Donnie, then he cried in front of everyone because he felt guilty about it. And then when he was HOH, he went on a complete power trip. He targeted people that his alliance didn't want to target, with him targeting Brittany for personal reasons, which he admitted. Then he got way too paranoid over Zach. He won both HOH and Veto when he really didn't need to. And then he overpromised to Paula to get her to throw the Battle of the Block competition so he could stay as HOH. Then he decided to nominate his ally, Zach, and then there's that whole veto fight. And Then he almost broke up the alliance because he and Caleb got into a fight earlier that week, and it was just a complete mess and utter disaster. He is someone who likes to tell people what to do instead of asking and consulting them, and he doesn't really take anything else into consideration. He's a clear example of an early alpha aggressive man flaming out. So I initially had no one from Big Brother 17, but then when I really thought about it last minute, Clay definitely fits this archetype. No, he was not the master strategist, and he wasn't the active leader in his alliance, but he was always someone who had his input in every single alliance that he was in, and he was very active in it. But honestly, that's not even the main reason why I have him here. I have him here because he's the most aggressive man on the entire cast. He got into several arguments with people like Davon, Audrey, and then he fought with James a bunch of times on his last week. And these were all fights that he essentially created. So it wasn't like he did absolutely nothing. And a lot of these fights were very heated argument, especially for that season. And he ended up flaming out pretty much because he got caught playing both sides and everyone was tired of it. And then he essentially quit. So yeah, I'm putting him here. Though he's probably one of the more boring examples of this archetype. But based on his personality, he fits here. Though I do feel like he kind of has the Jeff syndrome where they tried to edit him as the heartthrob. And while that may be accurate, he definitely has his angry alpha male elements that were edited down. So there's quite a few from Big Brother 18, so I'm not going to waste much time on it. Jose is the clear example of the alpha male first boot, where he was leading his alliance, very much so, to the point where he was telling people within and outside of his alliance that he was leading them. And obviously this got him targeted since he had a newbie alliance targeting the veterans and the vet won first HOH. He was very confrontational, he was very vocal, he was very loud about what he wanted and what he didn't wanted. He got into a bit of drama with Polly, and then everyone was just clowning him, and it did lead to him being evicted. And I don't think we've really seen a gay alpha male in this element. And obviously he's the biggest example of a flameout since he was the first boot. So Polly's definitely a shoe-in for this archetype. And what's interesting about him is that we heard his younger brother, Cody, talk about how much of an alpha man his older brother, Paul is, and how he kicks ass and all that stuff. So we're really hyped up on him for 2 years. And then once he was on Big Brother 18, we saw some signs of this at first, though in hindsight, it's more obvious, especially with the way he kind of handled Jose and their drama and like the death glare he gave Jose at the eviction, and just kind of just the way he trashed people and his entire demeanor. But it only grew as the weeks went on. He started getting a lot more petty. He essentially took over all of his alliances, so he was initially in the position where he was in the bottom of that large alliance. He got very vengeful at quite a few people throughout the season, which we saw with people like Tiffany, Davon, and Natalie and Bridget later on. And he found himself in quite a bit of drama throughout the season. Obviously, there's an entire week where he essentially accidentally caused the Kiev to go home, where his game blew up on him because he just attacked a bunch of the women, and then the guys turned on him the next week, and then they all kind of just gang up on him quite a few times. But yeah, Polly is someone who's a natural leader, and he's someone who cannot get out of drama, even if his life depended on it. And he had one of the greatest flame outs in Big Brother history, but he was in an early boot. So he's definitely a shoe-in for this tier. Sorry, this archetype. And the final person from this season is Paul. And obviously, I'm not just going to talk about his BB18 iteration here, but his BB19 iteration too. But even with his BB18 iteration, you definitely saw some of the signs. Whenever he was in a group, strategically, he would always try to or end up leading it. And he was never one who was kind of a follower, but he knew when to pivot, he knew when he needed to camouflage, but it didn't mean that he was a legit follower. So we did see that Paul got into his or their fair share of controversies and fights and arguments and drama throughout the season. Paul always entered other people's business. It was almost evil dick like, but I don't think Paul had the awareness to really own up to it or to realize that's what he or they were doing. And then we saw this completely be idealized and actualized on a Big Brother 19 when Paul was the sole vet in the cast. And then after the whole Cody situation, Paul set up a situation or the house structure where Paul had their allies under hierarchies, and based off of where you were in the hierarchy, the further along you're going to get dragged, the more information that he told, but he was always plotting behind people's backs. He would send certain people to fight with the people that they wanted out. It was a lot of psychological warfare that was happening through the season. And while there was a lot of drama on Big Brother 19, so much of it was orchestrated that Paul orchestrated, which was why it was very hard to kind of watch. And it was always like a 4-on-1 or a 5-on-2 situation. It was never really 1-on-1. And of course, Paul never owned up to any of this. Even in Big Brother 18, Paul had a hard time of owning his or their game. And then when Paul was called out about this on Big Brother 19, he completely fell apart and he couldn't own it. Hence him losing by a vote twice. But yeah, Paul definitely fits this archetype to a T. The only person that debuted on Big Brother 19 that fits this is Cody. And he's arguably, if not the most toxic example of the alpha slash aggressive male archetype. He's always someone who talked about not showing any emotion, and people, especially men who show emotions, are victims and crybabies and bitches or whatever. But the only emotion he really showed was inherent anger and very obnoxious anger. Otherwise, he was stone cold. Cody formed himself as the leader of his little grouping, but he thought that because he was a leader, he didn't have to actually tell anyone his plans so they could secure the votes to get what he wanted done. He didn't do any of that. He decided to blindside everyone in the house, even his own allies, to nominate Paul, who was in their alliance, and then Cody took absolutely no accountability over it. When he didn't get what he wanted, he then started causing fights with people, which we saw during the several times he argued with Josh. He even got into it with Paul when he came back, and I'm sure there's so many other fights that I forgot. Oh, yes, there's also issues between him and Mark after a while, and then we saw the dynamic with himself and Jessica. And Cody really put himself in a corner. He always talked about being the alpha male and all that stuff, and he really didn't know what to do strategically, but he acted like he knew it all, and he was not able to adapt whatsoever. So with that all the twists and all the bullcrap, he went home again, hence him being the first juror, and Cody's just a very toxic individual, at least from what he showed on the game, and that's not even with me getting into the other stuff that has nothing to do with gameplay. If you know what I mean, you know what I mean. So I have Swaggy here for a Big Brother 20, and the main reason why I have him here is that he is just a natural leader. We clearly saw how everyone in this group kind of just gravitated towards him and he kind of just took charge. The thing with him is that he does come off as arrogant a lot of the time, especially in the dining room, and he rubbed people the wrong way. Though when you really think about it, he didn't really get into much drama in the house outside of the awkward tiff with Winston, but you could just say that's the case because he didn't last long throughout the season because he was snipped so soon. But otherwise, I definitely think he fits here, but it's one of the calmer examples of it. Though he definitely has that energy when he's in the diary room, but that's kind of the thing. The only other person that I have from this season here is Winston. And I feel like he's someone who thinks that he's the alpha leader in the sense that he thinks that he was leading his alliance. But the truth is, he was always at the bottom of his alliance. The reason why I end up putting him here is because of his attitude and demeanor. And when you look at his actions, he was actually the most aggressive man in the house. He picked a fight with Swaggy for no reason when they're engaging in a conversation. sorry, the others were engaging in a conversation that had nothing to do with him. And then he decided to threaten and go after Scotty after nominating him, trying to scare him into doing whatever. He was trying to intimidate Scotty to do what he wanted. So yeah, I feel like this is the perfect spot for Winston. Alrighty, so I really don't want to talk about these two, so I'm just going to put them together. And there's really no difference between Jack and Jackson. Anyways, there are two peas in the pod during the time that both of them were in the house with just their vulgar behavior, their questionable isms behavior, the way they kind of bullied a lot of the house guests, and they kind of bulldozed over a lot of their allies so they could get what they wanted throughout their runs on the season, especially when they're all allied together. Them browbeating the other side of the house, which is essentially all the people who weren't aligned with them, to not talk game, especially when the camp comeback twist happened. They bullied everyone to not speak to the outsiders, especially about the gang, just the aggressive behavior overall. Luckily for us, Jessica won HOH and put both of them on the block where Jack ended up going home. But Jackson continued his behavior throughout the rest of the season. His aggressive behavior was why that initial alliance blew up to begin with, and then he had his back against the wall, so he had to win a bunch of competitions, especially with his showman's partner Holly, and even with the way that he spoke to some of the women, which we saw with Kat during that first week where they were a showman, and this continued when he was dealing with Holly for the rest of the season was very, very, very uncomfortable. And then he used his aggressive behavior to strategically browbeat Tommy into essentially submitting so Holly could be kept in the final five over Tommy, and that was his strategy. That is it for the modern era, and we're going to move right on to the final and current era of Big Brother and the men that represent this archetype within the diversity era. Okay, so no one fit the descriptor in Big Brother 23, and that really isn't surprising because they're really focused on the diversity aspect of it, and they wanted a very PC cast, and this was the first movie cast after the traumatic and PR disaster Big Brother 21, so I'm not shocked that there's no one of this archetype that is here. From Big Brother 24, I almost didn't put anyone in this tier either, but I do think Pooch was supposed to be that. And when you look at his actions, it definitely makes sense. Despite him doing horribly in the game, he was seen as the quote unquote leader of that guy's alliance. He was very pushy with what he wanted. He was very pushy about Taylor getting backdoored the first week. And then he was trying to be pushy with what he wanted people to do, even people that weren't working with him, though it caused him to be the official first person voted out on the second week, and that's really all I care to say about him. So we're moving on to a season, and the only person who fits this criteria, in my opinion, is Jared. And he's a lot like Polly in a way, where they're both Nepo babies, I guess. Though Jared was the son of Suri, though I think he would have been like this even if Suri wasn't in the house. Despite having his mother in the house, Jared wanted to do things his way. He often did things that Suri did not want him to do, and despite being in a prime position, Jared was always very argumentative with some of his allies. He was very pushy with what he wanted to do. He really didn't want to listen to anyone. And he got into his tiffs here and there, which ultimately led to the huge blow up that happened with himself and Corey in the 6th week that caused the house to essentially flip on Jared's side, and Jared was booted not long afterwards. And then the final person in this era, or at least as I am typing this, is definitely Tucker. And he's someone who didn't even understand the game, but he thought he knew everything. He refused to listen to anything his allies had to say. He didn't really care to listen to anyone. He was a know-it-all. He thought he knew it all. And he was very, very aggressive. He picked fights with so many people throughout the season, whether they were a man or a woman, but no one in or out of the house called him aggressive, and I wonder why that is. But I think because this was an era that was all about being pacey, Tucker being so crazy, wild, and unpredictable, and being the right demographic, if you know what I mean, definitely caused people to be more endeared by him instead of being annoyed by him, like they are with a lot of the other alpha slash aggressive men prior to him. Alrighty, so in conclusion, those are the men that I have for the aggressive alpha male list, and this is definitely one of the more prominent archetypes in Big Brother history. They're usually a great source for drama, whether they are early flame out or they really just dominate the seasons. And they're usually some of the most dynamic men of the cast, and they're ones that producers really rely on for a lot of their content. I did this video a lot quicker than I thought I was going to, so I'm definitely looking forward to doing the female version of this list. And after I do that, I think I only have like 4 or 5 more videos left. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to just completing this, and hopefully I'll be able to finish it by the end of the season. Thank you all for following me on this journey, and I'll be back with more content soon, either on this channel or Allow. Thank you. Have a nice day or night wherever you are.